The cold has a way of telling the truth. It cuts deeper than fear, sharper than memory. And that night, when the snow swallowed the world in white silence, I learned that some truths don't fade. They stay lodged under your skin. I had just pulled my rig onto a desolate mountain turnout, the engine ticking in the freezing air, when a sound broke through the stillness. Soft, frantic knocking on my door. A sound no trucker ever forgets. A sound that means someone's life is hanging by a thread. When I opened the door, the breath froze in my chest. A boy, no older than 9, stood barefoot in the snow, toes purple, skin pale as frost, his thin arms wrapped around himself like he was trying to hold his soul together. His eyes, wide, terrified, shimmering with tears that froze on his lashes, met mine as he whispered something that hollowed me out from the inside. "Don't leave her there." His voice cracked with a desperation that felt older than his little body, older than the night itself. I could smell the cold on him and something else, fear. I jumped down from the cab, boots crunching in the snow, breath turning to mist as the wind lashed across my face. I asked him who he meant, who her was, but he only pointed toward the dark line of pine trees at the edge of the turnout. No lights, no movement, just the suffocating stillness of winter swallowing the forest whole. My pulse spiked as I knelt beside him, the diesel hum of my idling truck vibrating through the frozen air. I asked him his name. He said Evan, and then his voice broke when he said, "She can't breathe." I wrapped him in my jacket, lifting him off the snow, feeling how light he was, too light. Like the cold had already begun stealing little pieces of him. He clung to me with trembling fingers, and I could feel his heartbeat, wild and terrified, pounding against my chest. I opened the passenger door and set him gently inside, cranking the heat, letting warmth spill into the cab. But before I could ask another question, Evan grabbed my wrist with a strength that didn't match his size. His eyes locked onto mine with pleading urgency. "Don't leave her there," he begged again. "Promise." The words carved into me, heavier than the storm clouds rolling over the ridge. I told him I wouldn't, because men like me, men who spend their lives alone on the road, know one thing better than anyone. Sometimes you're the only person left between someone and the dark. And when a child asks you for help, you go. You don't think. You don't hesitate. You go. I stepped back into the cold, boots sinking into the fresh powder, breath frosting with every exhale, and as I turned toward the tree line, a question rooted itself in my mind, colder than the snow beneath me. What could be waiting out there that made a boy run barefoot into a storm? Before I follow that trail deeper into the dark, let me tell you something from the bottom of my road-worn heart. If you're watching this, if you've stayed with me to this moment, hit the like button. Not for numbers, but because stories like this save lives. People need to hear what danger looks like, what fear sounds like, what courage costs. That simple click helps this reach someone who might one day find themselves on a road like mine, hearing a knock no one ever wants to hear. The wind shifted as I stepped away from the warmth of the cab, carrying with it a low howl that threaded through the trees like a warning pulled straight from the bones of the mountain. Night hadn't fully settled, but the sky was darkening fast, blue leaking into black, the kind of cold twilight that steals sound and judgment at the same time. My boots sank deeper as I approached the tree line, each step crunching into untouched snow that glowed faintly under the rising moon. Behind me, the truck's headlights stretched long shadows across the ground, reaching toward the forest like nervous fingers. I glanced back at the cab. Evan's small silhouette was barely visible through the frosted glass, hunched forward, clutching my jacket around his fragile frame. Even from a distance, something in the shape of his posture hit me hard. Fear that deep doesn't come from getting lost. It doesn't come from storms. It comes from something, or someone you're trying desperately to escape. His voice echoed in my mind, thin and broken. "Don't leave her there." The weight of that plea pushed me onward. As I crossed into the edge of the forest, the smell changed. Pine and cold earth, frozen sap, faint smoke, maybe hours old, and beneath it all, something metallic. My breath slowed as I listened for any sign of movement, but the woods were suffocatingly still. Not a branch creaked, not a bird stirred. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Night was settling over the pines, and the shadows stretched long between the trunks, deep enough to hide a lifetime of secrets. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness in a thin, trembling arc. Then I saw them. Tracks. Small footprints, Evan-sized, punched into the snow in frantic, irregular patterns. He'd run, hard, without stopping, without looking back. My chest tightened as I followed the trail deeper between the trees. After a few yards, another set of prints appeared beside his. Wider, heavier, an adult. The steps were uneven, dragging in places. Someone carrying weight, someone struggling. My pulse hammered. Evan hadn't been alone out here. Whoever he'd left, she'd been moving, or trying to. A sharp gust cut through the clearing, and the temperature dropped so fast it stung my face. The forest grew even darker, the last blue threads of evening swallowed whole. My breath fogged in quick bursts as a shape emerged near a fallen log, a dark mound half buried in snow. For a moment I thought I'd found her. My boots crunched closer, my flashlight shaking slightly in my grip, but when I reached it, the beam revealed nothing but a collapsed deer, frozen solid, its body stiff beneath the frost. A false alarm, a cruel one. I exhaled, the tightness easing just enough for clarity to seep back in. I scanned the area again. More tracks, circling, scattered, leading toward a small ravine. Something inside me bristled, the instinct that saved me more times than I can count. The ravine's mouth was too still, too quiet. The snow there didn't fall naturally. It looked disturbed, like something had been dragged down its slope. I pointed my flashlight at the trail and every hair on my arms rose. That wasn't the path of a deer, or a hiker, or anything that should have been out here alone in the cold. I took a slow breath, grounding myself in the familiar rhythm of the road, the grit, the weight, the duty that's been etched into my bones since the first time I climbed into a cab. I wasn't a cop, I wasn't a ranger, I was just a trucker with a conscience that didn't back down. Evan had trusted me. A child had asked me to save someone he loved. That meant turning back wasn't an option. Not now. Not ever. I tightened my coat, steadied my flashlight, and stepped toward the ravine, knowing full well that whatever I found down there, whoever I found, would change the rest of my night, maybe the rest of my life. The temperature dropped another notch as I approached the edge of the ravine, the kind of cold that seeps through your coat and into your spine. Snow drifted softly through the pines, settling on my shoulders, muffling every sound. The beam of my flashlight trembled across the slope, catching glimpses of jagged rocks and patches of exposed earth where the snow had been disturbed. Something, or someone, had gone down hard, and recently, the tracks leading in told a story written in panic. The small footprints, Evan's, stopped at the top of the ravine, toes pointing downward. The adult prints continued, staggered, slipping, pulling weight with every desperate step. My breath fogged in front of me as I knelt and brushed away a thin layer of snow. Beneath it, the earth held faint streaks of red. Not much, just enough to turn the cold night mean. My chest tightened. Whoever she was hurt. A gust of wind swept through the branches above me, sending ice crystals swirling across the ravine like dust in a collapsing room. I adjusted my grip on the flashlight and began descending the slope, each step cautious, bracing against the slick surface. The snow was softer here, deeper, muffling my boots as I slid and caught myself against jutting rocks. My breath grew sharp in my throat. Shadows stretched long in the beam, twisting against the uneven ground. Then the trail curved sharply around a boulder, disappearing into a darker pocket of the ravine. When I stepped around the rock, the world seemed to narrow. There, lying partially covered by snow, was a car, a compact sedan. Its roof caved in, windshield spiderwebbed, headlights shattered. A crash. A hard one. Fresh. The engine was still warm when I placed my hand on the hood, heat pulsing faintly beneath my glove like a dying heartbeat. A thin curl of steam drifted from the cracked grill. The smell of leaked coolant and cold oil filled the air, mixing with pine and frost. This wasn't an abandoned wreck. It had happened hours ago, maybe less. I circled the car slowly, my eyes scanning each window, each shadowed corner. The driver's door was open just enough to let snow drift inside. I crouched, shining the beam into the interior. The cabin was a mess. Airbags deployed, glass shards scattered across the seats, a child's backpack crushed beneath the dashboard, pink, with cartoon bears. Evans. That meant the woman he wanted me to save. She had to be his mother, and she hadn't walked away from this without a fight. A faint sound reached me, so soft I almost mistook it for the wind. A strained breath, weak, trembling, coming from the other side of the car. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. I moved quickly, boots slipping on ice, rounding the rear bumper until my light caught a shape slumped against the passenger door. A woman, mid-30s, blonde hair matted with frost, face pale, lips tinged blue. She was half-conscious, her body curled as if trying to shield herself from the cold. Her hands were scraped, her coat torn. She had dragged herself out of the wreck. She had tried to climb the slope, tried to reach her son. I dropped to my knees beside her, my breath forming clouds in the frigid air. I touched her shoulder gently. She flinched, eyes snapping open in a flash of fear. When she saw me, confusion washed over her face, then relief so fragile it hurt to witness. Her voice was barely a whisper, fragile as snow dust. Where's Evan? I told her he was safe, in my truck, warm, alive. The tension in her body broke. A single tear slid down her face, freezing before it reached her jaw. She tried to sit up, but pain hit her so hard she collapsed back into the snow. I saw it then. Her leg twisted unnaturally, boots soaked with blood beneath the snow. She wasn't walking out of here, not without help, not without me. The wind rose again, harsher now, pushing through the ravine with the low groan of a storm building strength. The woman shivered violently, breath shallow, eyes fluttering. She needed warmth, shelter, medical care, and fast. I slid my arms beneath her, lifting her with as much care as my shaking hands allowed. She was lighter than she looked, fragile in a way that made something deep inside me ache. As I began the climb back up the ravine with her held tight against me, a question gnawed at the back of my mind like a cold animal. Evan was barefoot, running through the snow, alone, and terrified. But this crash, it didn't explain everything. Not the panic in his voice, not the fear in his eyes, not the tracks I'd seen near the car that didn't belong to either of them. Someone else had been out here, and whatever had frightened that boy into running barefoot into the freezing dark, it wasn't finished. By the time I reached the top of the ravine, my arms were burning and my breath was coming out in sharp bursts that stung my lungs. The woman, Mara, weighed almost nothing, but the cold made every step feel like pushing through wet cement. The snow had thickened into a steady curtain, soft flakes drifting across my vision as I carried her toward the glow of my truck's headlights. The wind whistled through the trees in a low, mournful tone, as if the forest itself disapproved of us leaving with her. Evan's small face appeared in the passenger window the moment he saw us, his palms pressed against the glass, eyes wide, mouth trembling as the heat inside fogged the corners of the window. The instant I swung the door open, he scrambled across the seat, reaching out with shaking hands. "Mom," his voice cracked into a sob. Mara lifted a weak hand toward him, her fingers brushing his cheek before her strength faltered again. The moment hit me hard, quiet, raw, painfully human. I eased Mara into the passenger seat, adjusting the heater, wrapping her in every spare blanket I had stashed in the cab. Evan curled against her side, tears streaking down his chilled face. She whispered his name, voice trembling, breath unsteady. For a moment, the warmth of the truck seemed to chase the cold away, but beneath that fragile moment of safety, something kept tugging at the edge of my thoughts. Those tracks near the wreck, the ones that didn't belong, the ones that circled. I stepped back outside, closing the door gently behind me. The night had deepened, snow drifting under the orange glow of my truck lights, turning the clearing into a silent, glowing haze. I listened, really listened. A lifetime on the road teaches you to trust the sounds the world makes, and the ones it doesn't. The forest around me felt wrong, too still, too aware, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. The snow carried faint impressions now, new prints, half filled by fresh flakes, wider, deeper. They hadn't been there when I'd gone down the ravine. Someone had approached the truck while I was gone, or something had. A cold spike crept down my spine as I followed the shallow impressions across the turnout. They led toward the tree line, stopped, and vanished, as if swallowed by the dark between the pines. The diesel engine idled behind me, its familiar rumble grounding me for a heartbeat. Warm light spilled from the cab, outlining the silhouettes of a mother and child clinging to each other in the cold. But beyond that small island of safety, the forest pressed in like a living thing, silent, watchful, old. Snowflakes drifted through the beam of my flashlight, catching the light in shimmering arcs that looked almost deliberate. I scanned the darkness again. The tracks weren't animal, the stride was human, but the spacing, the way they cut into the snow, something was off, wrong, too heavy in some steps, too light in others, as if the owner didn't fully understand how to move. A shiver crawled up my arms, settling under my collar. Someone had been here, watching, close enough to see Evan, close enough to see me climb into the ravine, close enough to see the crash. I backed toward the truck slowly, never turning my back to the trees. The woods creaked softly, the sound subtle but enough to sharpen every instinct I had. I'd been in dangerous places before, rest stops crawling with desperation, gas stations where fear sat in the corner booth, but nothing felt quite like this. This wasn't panic, it wasn't adrenaline, it was the heavy, unmistakable feeling of being observed. When I climbed back into the cab, locking the door behind me, I tried to mask the tension in my voice. Mara's eyelids fluttered open, her breath shallow. She whispered that she'd tried to run, tried to climb, tried to reach Evan, but something had been in the woods. Something that watched her crawl out of the wreck, something that didn't come closer, but didn't retreat either. Evan buried his face against her shoulder, trembling. I reached for the ignition, ready to leave that mountain turnout in the rearview mirror forever. But before I shifted into gear, Mara looked at me with fearful clarity, her voice a faint whisper through chattering teeth. He wasn't alone out there. and the way she said he made the cab go cold again. I pulled the rig back onto the mountain road, tires crunching over fresh snow, headlights carving tunnels of pale light through the darkness. The storm was gathering strength now, flakes thickening, wind rising, the kind of night where the world feels hollowed out. The heater blasted warmth across the cab, but my hands still trembled on the wheel. Mara leaned weakly against the seat, Evan curled against her side, both wrapped in blankets that steamed faintly as the frost melted from their clothes. The road wound sharply along the cliffside, white drifts growing deeper by the minute. The snow distorted the world, swallowing sound, swallowing space, swallowing everything except the narrow beam ahead. For miles I'd driven this highway without a second thought, but now, something in the night pressed against the windows. Heavy and aware, I kept glancing at the mirrors more than the road. The forest blurred by on either side, endless rows of dark trunks that hid more shadow than tree. Mara stirred, her eyes groggy but alert enough to track the movement of the passing pines. She whispered her fear in fragments. She'd been driving home with Evan when she saw someone standing in the middle of the road, a man, thin, barely dressed for the cold, staring at her car with an expression she couldn't read. She swerved to avoid him. The road iced. The ravine swallowed the car whole. She blacked out. When she came to, Evan was gone, and the man was still watching her through the trees. She said his name like a breath, Jonas. Her voice broke when she explained the rest. Jonas wasn't a stranger. He was Evan's father, missing for months after walking out one night. No coat, no explanation, no return. Everyone assumed he'd vanished into the cold, but Mara said the man she saw wasn't the Jonas she remembered. His movements were wrong, his posture stiff, his eyes empty, like something inside him had been scooped out and replaced with cold air. Something had happened to him out there in the wilderness, something that had changed him in ways a person should never change. My grip on the steering wheel tightened as I processed her words. People disappear in the mountains every winter. Lost hikers, stranded tourists, broken down drivers. But coming back, different? That was something else. Something that gnaws at a man's sense of reality. Evan lifted his head, his small voice cracking as he insisted the figure in the trees wasn't his dad, that it looked like him, but it didn't move like him, didn't breathe like him, didn't act like him. The boy's fear was too real to ignore. A sign appeared through the whiteout, faded paint, bent metal, marking the edge of a narrow service road that led down toward town. I slowed the truck, wipers barely keeping up with the thickening snow. The storm was worsening fast and Mara needed help. Real help, hospital help. But something inside me resisted taking that turn. Instinct, sharpened by years alone on the road, whispered that the danger wasn't behind us. It was following, walking, plodding through the snow at a steady pace only something unnatural could maintain. I checked the mirror again. For a split second, something moved at the edge of my headlight's reach. A tall shape, thin, pale against the dark pines. I blinked, and it was gone. Disappeared between the trunks like a shadow swallowed by deeper shadow. My pulse spiked. It could have been a branch, a trick of the storm. Exhaustion messing with my vision. But the dread crawling up my spine told another story. Mara's gaze met mine in the mirror, as if she sensed my shift in breathing. She whispered, "He followed the car when it crashed. He didn't come down the ravine, but he stayed close enough to hear Evan scream." Evan whimpered, burying his face in her side. The wind howled through the trees, rattling the trailer like something brushing past it with long, deliberate steps. I eased back into the main lane, choosing distance over detour. Something about that storm swallowed comfort and left only instinct, and my instinct told me we weren't out of this. Not by miles. Not by breath. A trucker knows when a road no longer belongs to him, when it's been claimed by something else. And that night, the road didn't feel like mine anymore. The storm thickened into a white curtain that swallowed the road whole. My wipers beat a frantic rhythm against the glass, barely keeping up. Every few seconds, the wind shoved the rig sideways, making the trailer sway like it was caught in some giant's slow, deliberate breath. Mara clutched Evan closer, their shapes bundled together like a single trembling shadow in the passenger seat. The heater blasted full force, but the cold wouldn't leave the cab. It clung to us, seeping in through the metal, through the windows, through the air itself. The highway twisted through a dense stretch of forest now, trees crowding close, branches bending under the weight of fresh snow. Each trunk rose like a dark column. Each shadow stretched long, each shape staying just still enough to look like a person watching. My mirrors fogged on the edges, making every flicker of movement hard to trust. I leaned forward, knuckles white on the wheel, scanning for anything that didn't belong, anything that moved, anything that walked. And then, for the second time that night, I saw him, a shape at the side of the road, tall, thin, unmoving, a man, a silhouette that looked just enough like Jonas to turn my stomach. He stood facing the truck as we passed, not flinching, not stepping away, just watching. His head tilted slightly like he recognized me, like he'd been waiting. The headlights washed over him, and in the split second of illumination, something didn't match the human shape my mind wanted it to be. The posture was wrong, too rigid. The arms hung at the wrong angle. The neck looked stiff like it had forgotten how to bend. But the face, what little I saw of it, looked real, familiar. Mara gasped, covering her mouth. Evan whimpered into her coat. I didn't slow down. I couldn't, but as the truck barreled past him, my heart crashed against my ribs when the impossible happened. I checked the driver's side mirror, and he was walking, not standing, not fading, walking, following, not fast, not frantic, but steady. Steady in a way that cut me colder than the wind. Don't look, Mara whispered to Evan, voice cracking. She wasn't talking to him. The words felt like a plea to herself. Her hands were shaking. Her breathing quickened. She whispered, he wasn't like that before. Jonas never moved like that. I kept my eyes on the road, but something inside me tightened to the point of shaking. The storm swallowed the figure again, masking him behind the snow, but I could feel him out there. Not close, not far, just present, as if he belonged to the night now. Something claimed by the cold, something rebuilt by it. Mara whispered that when Jonas went missing months ago, he'd wandered into the old logging trails during a blizzard just like this. They never found the body, only his coat, torn, frozen stiff in the branches of a pine. She always believed he died that night, but when she saw him on the road hours ago, she knew something was wrong. His eyes didn't look back at her, they looked through her. Evan clutched her sleeve, his voice small and shaking as he said, Mom, that wasn't Dad. Dad doesn't smile like that. She stiffened. I felt a shiver colder than the storm ripple through me. I hadn't seen any smile, but kids notice things adults don't, especially things they're not supposed to see. The highway bent sharply, leading us onto a long stretch of road flanked by cliffs on one side and a steep drop on the other. A dangerous spot for any trucker on a good day. A nightmare during a blizzard. The engine growled under the strain as I slowed just enough to keep control. Snowdrifts piled against the guardrail. The wind roared like something alive, and beneath it all, footsteps. Not real ones, not audible, but I felt them, pacing the storm beside us. Then my headlights caught something ahead, an abandoned car half buried in snow, angled wrong across the road. I slammed the brakes, the rig fishtailing for a terrifying moment before settling. Mara gasped. Evan cried out. My pulse thundered. I squinted through the snow trying to see past the glare of the lights. The car's driver's side door was open. Snow piled inside. No footprints leading away, no footprints leading toward, just the car, and the storm, and the kind of silence that means something is terribly, terribly wrong. Mara's voice broke the silence, barely audible. He found us, and the way she said it made the darkness outside feel suddenly awake. I inched the rig forward until the headlights washed over the abandoned car, revealing more than I wished I'd seen. Snow clung to the shattered rear window, forming a white crust over the glass. The driver's door hung open like a torn page in a horror story, swaying slightly in the wind. No tire tracks, no footsteps, no sign of struggle. Just a vehicle planted dead center across a mountain road no one should have been traveling in a storm like this. It felt staged, placed, like bait. Mara's breathing hitched. A soft gasp she tried to swallow back. Evan pressed closer against her, trembling beneath the blankets. I lowered the window just an inch, just enough to listen, and the storm's howl poured in cold and sharp. Underneath it I heard nothing, which was the problem. In weather like this, sound should scatter everywhere. Snow hitting glass, wind cutting through branches, ice shifting, but there was only a smothered quiet, thick and unnatural. I threw the rig into park, grabbed my heavy coat off the back of the seat, and stepped outside with a flashlight clenched tight in my hand. The cold slapped me across the face, freezing the sweat on my skin. Snowflakes stung like needles as I made my way toward the car, boots sinking deep. I kept my eyes moving. Forest, cliffs, road, mirrors of shadow between the trees, because everything in me screamed that whatever happened here wasn't done happening. When I reached the car, I leaned in cautiously, sweeping the beam across the interior. Empty seats, deflated airbags, no blood, no belongings, just a strange, eerie absence, like someone had wiped it clean. But the worst part was the windshield. On the inside, facing the steering wheel, someone had smeared a handprint through the frost, a child-sized handprint, small, delicate, like Evan's. My stomach dropped. I stepped back quickly, scanning the snow around the vehicle. No footprints led away, not one. The storm was heavy, but not heavy enough to erase all sign of movement so perfectly. not in minutes, not in hours. It was as if the person who'd been here had simply vanished. Behind me, the truck headlights flickered, not a bulb issue, not an electrical glitch. A shadow had passed in front of them. I spun, heart slamming against my ribs. Flashlight slicing through the whiteout. The tree line looming beyond the road looked like a wall of teeth in the dark. The branches swayed violently, bending under wind or under weight. For a moment, in the jittering chaos of snow, I saw a shape standing between two pines, tall, still, watching. My breath froze. My pulse stuttered. Every instinct I had screamed, "Get back in the truck, now." I backed away from the abandoned car, boots crunching in uneven rhythm, refusing to turn my back until I reached the cab. When I climbed in and slammed the door, the warmth hit me like a wall. Mara's eyes locked onto mine instantly. "Was there anyone?" she whispered. I didn't answer, not directly. I couldn't look at Evan and tell him what I'd seen, not when the last thing that terrified boy needed was for me to confirm his worst fear. Instead, I started the rig moving, slowly navigating around the abandoned car, tires grinding over packed snow. The road ahead curved into yet another tunnel of trees, each one swallowing more of the light. Evan's voice came next, quiet, thin, almost lost in the hum of the heater. "He doesn't leave footprints," he said. "He didn't leave them last time either." Mara's body tensed so sharply, I saw it even from the corner of my eye. Her fingers gripped the blanket in a silent plea for this night to end. I didn't respond. I couldn't, because deep down, I knew the boy wasn't lying. Somewhere in the storm behind us, something was walking, and it wasn't bound by the rules of the living. The road tightened into a narrow stretch flanked by steep rock walls, the kind of place where even daylight felt claustrophobic. At night, during a blizzard, it felt like driving through the throat of some vast, ancient thing. Snow hammered the windshield in chaotic bursts, swirling and twisting like it wasn't falling from the sky but rising from the ground. The wind moaned through the cracks in the mountain, the sound eerie enough to mimic a voice trying to form words. Mara shifted in the seat, her breath shallow, her face drained of color. Evan held her tightly, but the boy's wide eyes weren't on his mother. They were fixed on the side mirror, unblinking, watching, waiting for something I prayed he wouldn't see. I wanted to tell him everything would be okay, but the lie caught in my throat, because the storm wasn't acting like a storm anymore. It was reacting, listening, moving with purpose. The headlights caught something through the veil of snow, an old service tunnel cut into the rock, half collapsed, long abandoned. The steel gate meant to block it had been ripped off its hinges, twisted like soft wire. The sight punched a chill through me colder than the wind. I'd driven this road a dozen times over the years. That gate had always been welded shut, marked with hazard signs warning drivers to stay back. Tonight, it gaped open like a mouth. Evan whimpered softly, burying his face in Mara's coat. She closed her eyes, whispering something that sounded like a prayer. I kept driving, refusing to slow, refusing to look at the tunnel as we passed. But from the corner of my vision, the beam of my headlights skimmed across something inside, something pale, something human-shaped, standing perfectly still against the far wall. My grip tightened on the wheel until my hands shook. I didn't say a word. The rig continued forward, but the storm grew thicker, wilder, slamming against the cab in sudden bursts, like fists pounding on metal. The trailer rattled behind us, the chains groaning. Snow swirled so viciously across the road that the world vanished beyond the hood. I switched to low beams, but the darkness swallowed the light whole. That was when Mara whispered, "He used to be gentle. Jonas never hurt anyone." Her voice trembled. "But the man I saw, he wasn't my husband. He looked like him, exactly like him, but he didn't breathe right, didn't move right." Her eyes glistened. When I crawled out of the car, he was standing at the top of the ravine, just standing, like he'd been waiting for the crash. I felt the air thin in my lungs, the weight of the steering wheel suddenly heavier. "He didn't come down to help," Mara continued. "He didn't speak. He just watched. I called his name and he tilted his head like a dog hearing something unfamiliar." She wiped a tear from her cheek. Then he smiled, a smile I've never seen before, a smile that didn't belong to him. Evan shook violently in her arms. "He didn't follow us like a person," the boy whispered. "He followed the sound of our breathing." My heart stopped. That was when the wind outside changed pitch, sharper, louder, a whistle that threaded through the seams of the cab, not just blowing, listening. I lowered the radio volume, held my breath, and for one terrifying moment, it felt like the night itself was leaning closer to hear the engine's pulse. A thud hit the roof of the trailer, then another, slow, heavy, measured. Mara gasped, covering Evan's ears. My blood turned to ice. Something was moving along the top of my truck, walking, one deliberate step at a time. Snow dust drifted past the windshield as small vibrations traveled through the cab, traveling from the rear of the trailer toward the hood. Each footfall sunk through the metal with a weight that didn't belong to something weakened by cold. I gripped the wheel with both hands, fighting the urge to slam the brakes or swerve. Either would kill us on this narrow stretch. The steps reached the midpoint of the trailer, then stopped. The storm fell silent around us, completely silent. I breathed out slowly, the air fogging the cabin. Then Evan whispered the words that hollowed me out. He knows we're here. And the worst part? I already knew he was right. For a long stretch of road, all I heard was the faint rattle of the heater and the quiet, terrified breaths of the two people I'd taken into my rig. The storm outside had muted itself into an eerie hush, as if the world had been placed under glass. But the weight above us, the presence, remained, not moving, not shifting, just existing in a way that felt wrong on a level deeper than instinct. It was as if the thing on my trailer was listening, matching the pace of my heartbeat, waiting for something I didn't understand. I forced myself to keep the rig steady, eyes narrowed to slits as the snow thickened again. The cliffs on either side funneled the wind into ghostly howls, but none of it masked the quiet pressure on the roof. Mara held Evan tight, rocking him gently. She kept whispering promises, soft, trembling vows that everything would be okay, but I could tell she didn't believe them. Neither did I, because whatever stood above us wasn't a desperate man lost in the cold. It was something that had learned to walk in his shape. The road curved toward a narrow bridge that crossed a frozen stream far below. The rails were low, rusted, barely meant for cars, let alone a loaded rig and a whiteout. I slowed, heart pounding. If the thing above shifted its weight at the wrong moment, the trailer could slide and we'd all plunge into the ravine. Just then, the weight moved, a slow drag of something across metal, not footsteps this time. Something testing, feeling the shape of the truck, mapping it. The sound snaked down my spine. I clenched the wheel tighter, knuckles bone white. "Stay down," I whispered without looking at them. Mara and Evan huddled lower, disappearing into the blankets like two fading embers fighting the wind. Then, something tapped the roof directly above me. A single, deliberate knock. Not loud, not aggressive, just intentional, like a calling card. Adrenaline surged through me, hot against the cold air. I kept the rig moving, eased it onto the narrow bridge, careful not to overcorrect. The trailer creaked as the wind pushed against it. Snow whipped sideways in sheets. The whole world felt held in a breath. Then something shifted in the mirror. A shape, pale, thin, leaning over the edge of the trailer, hands pressed to the metal, fingers too long, joints too stiff. Jonas's face, or something wearing it, hung upside down in the mirror's reflection, staring straight into the cab. His eyes were wide, unblinking, glossy like glass marbles, reflecting the headlights but not reacting to them. His mouth opened slowly, too slowly. And though the glass muted everything, I knew he wasn't breathing. I jerked the wheel instinctively, the rig sliding dangerously close to the edge of the bridge. Mara screamed. Evan hid his face in her coat. I fought the skid, muscles straining, teeth grinding as the tires finally gripped again. When I looked back up, the face was gone, vanished, leaving only swirling snow behind. But the weight didn't vanish. It moved again, toward the back of the trailer this time, fast, quicker than a human in this cold could move, quicker than anyone broken or lost could manage. I hit the end of the bridge with a jolt of relief, but I knew better than to trust it. The forest pressed close again, branches scraping the sides of the trailer like fingers, shadows twisted in the headlights. The storm grew louder, the wind howling in uneven, broken patterns, almost rhythmic, almost like breath. And then, the roof went silent, completely. I didn't know if the thing had jumped off you, or dropped down the back, or crawled to a place I couldn't see. But Mara saw something before I did. Her hand shot forward, pointing through the windshield. Her voice cracked with terror. "Look." I followed her shaking finger, and there, standing in the middle of the road ahead, blocking our path, was the silhouette of Jonas, unmoving, barefoot in the snow, head tilted, waiting. And the road behind us, still narrow, still deadly, still surrounded by cliffs. He had chosen our direction. He had chosen our pace. He had chosen this moment. The storm wasn't trapping us. He was. He stood motionless in the middle of the road, snow swirling around him like a storm, obeying his breath. Jonas, or whatever was wearing Jonas's shape, stared at us with a stillness no living man possessed. His bare feet didn't sink into the snow, not an inch. The flakes that touched his skin melted unnaturally fast, turning into thin trails of steam that curled upward like smoke from a dying fire. I kept the rig rolling but slowed to a crawl. Too close and he'd be on us. Too far and we'd be trapped between cliffs with nowhere to turn. Mara's breath stuttered. Evan clung to her arm, eyes wide with childhood terror, the kind that never fully leaves a person. "That's not my dad," he whispered through trembling lips. "He doesn't look at me like that." He was right. Jonas's eyes didn't see Evan. They didn't see Mara. They didn't see me. They saw the heat inside us. Breath, warmth, life. Something the thing inside him no longer remembered how to make, but still desired. The creature took a step. Not forward, not backward, just wrong. A sideways movement that bent the body in angles joints weren't meant to reach. Mara gasped, covering Evan's eyes. My pulse hammered so violently it echoed in my ears. The wind dropped suddenly like the whole mountain inhaled at once, and Jonas smiled, wide, cold, mirroring nothing human. That was my moment. I slammed the accelerator. The rig roared, tires spinning on packed snow before launching forward with a violent surge. Jonas didn't move at first, didn't flinch, didn't even lift his arms. He only tilted his head as the headlights washed over his face, revealing eyes so black they swallowed the world around them. And then, in the blink of a heartbeat, he darted, not away, not aside, but onto the truck. His feet hit the hood with a sound like snapping ice. He slammed both hands onto the glass, cracking the windshield with spiderweb fractures that spread in jagged patterns across my view. Mara screamed. Evan sobbed. I ducked instinctively as Jonas's face pressed against the cracking glass, skin stretched thin, eyes unblinking, mouth opening as wide as the fractures would allow. The truck fishtailed. I fought the wheel. Every muscle in my body screamed to hold the line. The creature's fingers dragged across the windshield, leaving thin scratches that glowed faintly like embers. The snow around us swirled in a violent cyclone, spinning unnaturally fast, pulling toward him like he was the center of the storm. I made a choice, the only choice. We were approaching a sharp bend, a curve with no guardrail, just a drop straight down into a forest of frozen pines. I knew this road, knew its dangers, knew its angles like scars on my hands, and I used that knowledge. I gripped the wheel, counted my breath, and swung hard. The rig jerked left, the trailer whipping behind us like a flail. Jonas's body slid across the hood, his fingers scraping desperate grooves into the metal. Snow erupted into the air. The truck skidded, tires screaming against ice. Then, with a sound like tearing fabric, Jonas lost his grip. His body flew off the hood, swallowed into the white abyss as the rig completed the turn. The storm howled, furious, lashing the truck with wind so violent the entire cab shuddered. I didn't slow down. I didn't look back. I drove until the trees thinned, until the storm softened, until the world finally remembered how to breathe again. Mara collapsed into the seat, shaking uncontrollably. Evan clung to her, burying his face in her coat. Miles later, when we reached the first signs of town, the glow of streetlights through the thinning flakes, Mara finally whispered, "He's gone, isn't he?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to comfort her. I wanted to believe the thing we left in the snow had died with the storm. But Jonas had walked without footprints, had stood without breath, had smiled with a face that wasn't his anymore. So I told her the truth. I don't know. We pulled into the emergency bay. Nurses rushed out. Warmth and safety replaced the cold. Mara was taken in. Evan was wrapped in blankets and carried somewhere calm. I stayed in my truck, hands shaking on the wheel long after the storm stopped. Some stories end when the danger passes, some when dawn breaks. But this one stayed with me. Because hours later, when I finally stepped out of the cab, I saw something in the snow beside my tire, a single bare footprint, deep, perfect, fresh, facing toward the town, not away from it. I looked into the darkness behind the buildings, into the spaces where the light didn't reach, and for the first time in years, fear settled heavy in my bones. You've ridden this road with me tonight, through the cold, the dark, the impossible. If this story got your heart beating or your gut tightening, do one thing for me. Hit that like button so more people know the dangers hiding out there on the lonely miles. Subscribe if you want to keep traveling with me, because justice doesn't rest. And out here, neither do the things that walk without footprints. Stay close, stay warm, and I'll see you on the next mile.